everybody, Mike Iaconelli back out here in the shop with a very special episode. And in today's shop, we're going to be talking about my top 4 best baits for the month of November. My top 4 baits for the month of November. All right, first things first, let's talk about November. Now, depending on what part of the country you live in, November is getting cold. The weather is starting to get colder, cooler. Our days are shorter. A light is a lot less throughout the day. Our mornings are colder, and our low temperatures at night are really getting down there. This is fall, guys. So if you're fishing in November, this is fall fishing. In these top 4 videos, you know how we do it. We always break it down. I give you 2 for the north part of the country, let's say above the Mason-Dixon line. Let's say Virginia and north. And then I'm going to give you 2 for the southern part of the country. Let's say Virginia, the Carolinas, all the way down to Florida and Texas. That's a good way to break up the country. But regardless of where you're from, the month of November, it's getting colder, the days are shorter, and that means fall fishing. If you're watching this and you live up north, we're getting into that late fall transition period. And if you remember from my other videos, that means fish are leaving that fall feed and they're starting to head to where they're going to winter. They're starting to go to where they're going to spend their winter. If you're down south, November is a little bit more still in that fall feed, right? We have fish on the tail end of really feeding up before they make the change to that wintertime pattern. Okay, so November, fall fishing. Let's start with my number 1 bait for fall fishing in November, especially up north, is tight wobble crankbait. Tight wobble crankbait. And you've heard crankbait a lot in my last few top 4 months. October, September, you heard about a crankbait. But now I'm really getting to the crankbaits that have an ultra tight wobble. The Rapala Shad Rap is one of those baits that has an ultra tight wobble. I'm really a big fan of the 2 smaller sizes, the number 5 and of course the number 7. And if you look at that bait, it's thin. It has a thin, slightly angled bill. The bait's made of balsa. And you ready for this? No rattles. It's quiet. This really is the ultimate finesse crankbait. And in the month of November, as those fish are sliding away from the pockets and the creeks and the shoals and the flats, they're leaving there and they're heading toward where they're going to winter. Dude, that thing will catch them. It'll still make the fish react. It's got that tight wobble. But as the water temperature is cooling from the 60s into the 50s, that is hard to beat. You know, colors on that Shad Rap in the month of November, guys, I keep it super simple. I throw colors that imitate a shad, your whites and your silvers, and I throw colors that imitate crawfish. Remember, November is that transition month where fish are starting to also feed. They're still feeding on bait, but they're starting to feed back on crawfish as well. So Shad Rap, tight wobble, quiet, silent, covers a lot of water, and I'm really trying to throw this thing down the break lines where the fish are exiting. So that's the mindset. If you're up north in the month of November, think about where they were feeding a month ago. Look out into the lake to where they're going to spend their winter, and then work down that break line, casting that Shad Rap. Great bait in the month of November. Okay, number 2, and this, especially for November, for my anglers in the northern part of the country, this bait is really starting to get good. This is the first month where this bait, in my opinion, really starts to fire back up, and it is a metal blade bait. And when you look at that blade bait, this happens to be the Mullix Trago Vibe. Really has a lot of attributes that make it a great November bait. You've got that shad profile in this bait. You have that vibration, almost like a lipless, right? That tight vibration with this lure. But the other thing that you have with this that we can't get with a tight wobble crankbait is it sinks. And I love incorporating this blade bait in the month of November because I can get it deeper and I can fish it quicker in that zone where I can't reach with a shad wrap or a DT6 or something like that. So great bait, especially when you have colder nights, a cold front situation in November. You know, if you have a stable conditions or a warm front, fish are going down those break lines and they're feeding and they're on the break. They're on the shallow to the actual break. But when a cold front comes through in November, it's a bluebird day, your temperature drops, it's a chilly morning, fish are getting lethargic. They're getting deeper and lower to the bottom. So those fish on that break line, instead of being on the top and the side, they'll be on the bottom of that break line, or they'll slide off of it and go into deeper water. And because of that, a sinking metal blade bait is perfect. I'm using my active target a lot. I'm covering a lot of water. Remember, fish are sliding, but once you find them, you can slow down, and that is a killer, okay? Metal blade bait, number 2 on my top 4 baits in the month of November, especially if you're fishing up north. All right, now we're going to go south. Now we're starting to talk about south of Virginia. We're in the Carolinas. We're in Georgia. We're in Alabama. We're even in Florida and Louisiana and even on the West Coast in California. And it's November and it's fall, but we're still in the fall feed. We're on the tail end of that fall feed. And because of that, I sound like a broken record, I want a crankbait again. But I'm going to go to a crankbait that has a little more presence. I'm going to go to a crankbait, still has a tight wobble, but gives me a lot of options in depth. And they've got this in a deep and a shallow model, and that's a Rapala OG Slim. Man, oh man, when they're in that fall feed, this is the kind of bait I'm using to target fish that are eating bait. Specifically, a lot of those southern fisheries, shad, threadfin, gizzards, right? Stuff like that. And that is a perfect imitation of those baits. Remember, fall feed, bass are in the backs of the creeks, they're in the backs of the pockets, they're in coves, and they're on shoals and humps, right? And their job in the month of November is to keep feeding before it gets too cold. And once it starts dropping too cold, then they're going to start going, just like in the north, they're going to start heading toward their wintering spot. But while that fall feed is going on, that OG Slim is a killer. I could fish it on a bait caster. I could cast it far. It's got the bait fish profile. One of the things I'm always trying to do with a crankbait in the month of November, especially in the south, is deflect it off of something. So when you're in the back of that pocket or you're in the back of a creek and you're watching that bank, look for places where there are targets that run with that bank. So stumps, rocks, a lone brush pile, a pineling, anything that's hard, and I'm trying to deflect it. That's going to create a reaction strike. And of course, you should see bait in these pockets. And when you do, that thing's going to be a killer. So another crankbait. And then last but not least, and this is where that November time starts to transition, right? Fall feed in the south in the month of November. It's still happening, but we're right on the cusp of it getting too cold. And because of that, fish start feeding on crawls again, right? You know, month of September, man, it was all about silver, long, shiny lures. But now as November hits, especially in the later part of the month, I'm going to start fishing a crawfish imitator again like a jig. You know, 100% guys, this is one of my favorites because of the profile. And it's a missile mini flip jig. I love the 3/8. I love the 1/2 ounce. And I tend to fish it in crawfish type colors. black and brown, green pumpkin, black and blue, darker, more crawfish-based colors. And I start going to a chunk. Remember, the trailer on a jig is pretty important. So all summer long, if you remember from my other videos, we've been fishing action trailers, right? Warmer water, the fish are jacked up, their metabolism's high. You want a trailer that does this. But in November, when they start to feed on crawls again, that water's cooler. The water's going to be in the mid to upper 60s, all the way down to the upper 50s. And I want a trailer on that jig in the month of November in the South that's a more neutral action trailer. And I love the chunk style trailers. The Maxent one is great. This is the meaty chunk, the power bait version. And the small size on the Missile Mini Flip. All right, this is a tip that I do. A lot of guys will actually punch it through the fat. That's kind of the old pork rind style trailer. But that makes a bigger profile. In November, I want something that's compact. I want something that's going to get in and out of cover, and I want something that's an easy meal. So instead of going through the fat, I take that chunk style trailer and I actually thread it. I just go all the way through the fat until I come out of the bottom of that fat, and then I just slide it up on that 360-degree keeper. And when you look at it, you got just those little arms in the back, and they're very fluid, right? Cooler water, month of November. We don't want like this. We want fluid. So the chunk is perfect on there. You know, I'm targeting those same areas. The backs of pockets, the backs of creeks, humps and shoals. But I'm kind of fan casting that around that hard cover. And when those fish start to make that conversion to crawfish, it's hard to beat a little tiny jig, just like that. All right, guys, top 4 baits in November. Crankbait for sure. North and south. Blade bait up north. And last but not least, start making the change back to crawfish baits. Start making the change back to those jigs in the month of November. Man, I hope you like this one, talking about my top 4 baits in November. Fall fishing, one of the best times of the year to catch a lot of big bass. If you like what you're seeing, stop right now. Hit the subscribe button. See it down there? Subscribe to my channel. We'll send you a notification on brand new content every single week. If you're already subscribed, tell your buddies about this channel. We're here to hopefully help you become a better fisherman. I hope you enjoyed it. Have a good November. Hey everybody, Mike Iaconelli. I hope you enjoyed this week's In the Shop. I hope you learned a little bit. And if you like these videos, remember, there's a whole boatload. Check out these 2 and you're going to learn more about bass fishing.